announcement about an upcoming event. This Saturday is our Family Day at the Memorial, where we will have activities, obviously for families, a lot of things for kids, reenactors, living historians to show what it was like during the war. Build your own Higgins boat. We'll have an activity along our new nature trail. It'll be a great day for a stroll in the woods where you learn a little bit about World War II. And best of all, through our sponsorship, it's free admission. So bring your family on up for Family Day at the Memorial from 10 to 3. And it'll be a great time to visit. Really, every day is a great time to visit, including today, where we have a great Lunchbox lecture schedule. Our speaker today is Dr. Stephen M. Rusiecki. He's a retired lieutenant colonel for the U.S. Army and currently serves as the Dean of Academics at the U.S. Army Inspector General School up at Fort Belvoir in Virginia. He's the author of 3 books, one on the 6th SS Mountain Division at the end of the war in Europe, one on the battle for Lunchbox. And I threw this in just because I wanted to say Lunchbox. But one on the battle of Lunchbox as the key to the Battle of the Bulge. And then finally, the one we'll be discussing today, Invasion On, D-Day, the press, and the making of an American narrative. How did the coverage of D-Day on and soon after June 6, 1944 shape the way we still look at it today? That's what we're going to learn. And so it's my privilege to welcome Dr. Stephen Rusiecki up here and turn the podium over to you.
Thank you, John. Appreciate it very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for that kind introduction, John. I'm grateful for the opportunity to talk to all of you this afternoon about my latest book, which John just held up, Invasion On, D-Day, the Press, and the Making of an American Narrative, published by Naval Institute Press in Annapolis. I always have to plug the publisher. All right, so first and foremost, I'd like to introduce you to the book by asking you to imagine that today is 6 June 1944, and you and millions of other Americans have been on tenterhooks for weeks anticipating the coming Allied invasion of German-occupied France. So let's get on with it. In the Columbia Broadcasting System's New York newsroom, the clock ticked past midnight Eastern Wartime, signaling the beginning of a new day, Tuesday, 6 June 1944. Jesse Zuzmer, CBS's night news editor, and his nighttime news crew welcomed what seemed like another uneventful graveyard shift. Zuzmer and his team had known for days that news of the Allied invasion of occupied France, what we know as D-Day, could erupt across the wire service machines at any moment. However, on this night, the 13 news teletype machines, the primary sources for the network's news broadcasts, chattered with their normal, monotonous rhythms. The tickers for the Associated Press, the United Press, the International News Service, Reuters, which is the British news service, and the Office of War Information all churned out routine, wartime news reports. Against this backdrop of clattering teletype machines and the clackety-clack of newsmen typing out copy, radio station KNX in Los Angeles piped in the sounds of Lenny Kahn's orchestra over the entire 143-station network. All seemed well. But then everything changed at 37 minutes past midnight. In the newsroom, the bell on the AP's ticker rang not once, not twice, but 5 times. Zuzmer and his crew rushed to the teletype machine and watched in stunned silence as the ticker spelled out a news bulletin. London, Tuesday, June, Associated Press. The German news agency Transocean said today in a broadcast that the Allied invasion had begun. Zuzmer immediately telephoned and awakened the head of CBS News, Paul White. Zuzmer told the groggy White that the news team could not verify the report. The specter of the Joan Ellis mishap a couple of days earlier, in which a young teletype operator in London sent a false invasion flash, compelled both Zuzmer and White to hesitate. Across town, the INS's night editor hesitated as well for the very same reason. No one wanted to initiate another false news flash of the invasion. After a few minutes, the INS news editor decided to push the message across the wire to his subscribing newspapers. Zuzmer immediately informed White that the same German report had just come over the INS ticker. So White blurted out, "Well, then get it on the air." At 48 minutes past midnight Eastern Wartime, Ned Calmer, reading from a scrap of yellow paper, broke into Lenny Kahn's musical broadcast. "We are interrupting this program to bring you a special bulletin. A bulletin has just been received from the London office of the Associated Press, which quotes the German Transocean News Agency as asserting that the invasion of Western Europe has begun," unquote. 7 minutes earlier, across town in NBC's New York newsroom, the NBC announcer broke into the network's own musical program to proclaim that the NBC shortwave monitoring station had just picked up from London the same report issued by the German Transocean News Agency. The NBC announcer warned the listening audience, though, that the report still lacked confirmation by Allied sources. In both the CBS and NBC newsrooms, the OWI ticker remained ominously silent, offering no official confirmation of the German report. However, for those members of the American public listening to these bulletins over two of the four major networks, something big was afoot. Night shift workers and night owls alike in all time zones knew that even without complete confirmation of the German reports, the invasion had surely begun, and radio had spearheaded the reporting. In doing so, radio laid the foundation for a narrative of the invasion that would unfold in the print and broadcast media over the next 24 hours, a thematically framed storyline that would endure in America's collective consciousness for decades to come. On the East Coast, the major radio networks have been broadcasting news of the invasion for several hours on 6 June by the time the first newspapers rolled off the presses and into the hands of a now wide-awake and news-hungry American public. In New York, the Herald Tribune, the Mirror, the World Telegram, and the Journal American all hit the newsstands between 8 and 9 a.m. with invasion headlines and stories. These New York newspapers, like many others across the country, had to retool and rework the editions they had just put to bed shortly before the wire services and broadcast networks sounded the alarm at 37 minutes past midnight Eastern Wartime. The editions slated for circulation on the morning of 6 June 44 all carried headlines announcing another major story: the capture of Rome by the American Fifth Army. In fact, President Roosevelt had just spoken over the airwaves that very evening to all Americans, celebrating this significant triumph while also cautioning against premature optimism that an easy victory in Europe was now in the offing. Much to the chagrin of Lieutenant General Mark W. Clark, commanding general of the Fifth Army in Italy, and the troops under his command, news editors unceremoniously pushed the story of Rome's liberation off America's front page in favor of D-Day news. But not every newspaper took the time to revise the entire morning edition before launching copies onto the streets and into the public's hands. The New York Daily News, with a circulation of over 2 million, the largest in America in 1944, by the way, did not wait for radio networks to garner all the invasion attention. In fact, the Daily News owned its own local radio station, WNEW, and from its own shortwave listening post, picked up the German transmission at 0036 Eastern Wartime and then broadcast it locally at 40 minutes past midnight, technically scooping the AP and the other wire services and broadcast networks. Most significantly, the Daily News perhaps produced the nation's earliest newspaper edition, announcing that D-Day had likely begun. At 2:15 a.m., the first copy hit the stands with a headline announcing that King gives up Italy, above a smaller subtitle proclaiming, rather in awkward syntax, Nazis report move in sea fight off France. Within 25 minutes at 2:40 a.m., the Daily News had pushed out another edition with a new headline: Nazis report invasion on. Incredibly, less than 45 minutes later, another edition appeared, followed by a fourth edition at 4:03 a.m. with a headline in 3-inch letters proclaiming invasion begins. The Daily News's fast-changing editions exemplified how aggressively newspapers throughout the country reacted to news of the invasion and sought to get their news products into the hands of American readers. Only then, through the mass ceremony of common readership, could all Americans further connect with and become part of the process of creating a common narrative of D-Day at the moment the event occurred. Most importantly, a firm demarcation line between the newspapers and the broadcast networks did not exist. Instead, they complemented each other, with newspapers reinforcing to a remarkable degree the same basic information and thematic frames the networks had aired throughout the night and into the day on 6 June 1944. However, radio never eclipsed newspaper readership. Instead, the listening public actively sought out newspaper coverage of the invasion for more in-depth news and images of the landings. Thus, on D-Day and in the days that followed, newspaper circulation skyrocketed. Radio had served as a bridge to the newspapers popping up on newsstands throughout the nation on 6 June 1944. While the broadcast networks gave the American public the sense that D-Day was unfolding in the moment, the newspapers stepped in and helped arrest that chaotic momentum, giving the American public a chance to absorb and visualize what the airwaves had shared with them throughout the day. Despite emerging on the scene several hours after news of the invasion broke, America's newspapers contributed significantly to all four of the major themes, essentially media-constructed thematic frames that ultimately shaped the American D-Day narrative as the invasion unfolded. Of the four themes, the first being the singular importance of the invasion, the second, the sacralization of the entire enterprise as a, quote, great crusade, unquote. The third, the remarkable competence and skill of the senior Allied military leaders. And the fourth, the exceptional abilities of the American troops. The newspapers, like the broadcast networks, most effectively communicated to all Americans that first and most dominant theme, that the invasion represented the most important military operation of the war and the opening chapter of Nazi Germany's demise. D-Day represented something different, something bigger in the context of the global war. So the newspapers, like their radio colleagues, responded by portraying the invasion news in innovative and unprecedented ways. In short, the newspapers used visual tools to underline specific themes in the invasion coverage in a way that more ephemeral radio broadcasts could not. And so, America, through its radio broadcasts and newspapers, brought the D-Day story into America's living rooms and consciousness in such a pronounced and deliberate manner that a standard narrative promptly emerged that has endured to this day. And it all started when the press declared to the nation on 6 June 1944, invasion on. Thank you. Questions?
You were saying wartime. What was that? Is that like the like in England it starts there?
They called it Central European time over there, but over here during World War II, they divided up different war. It's basically the same as what we have today: Mountain Time, Central Time,
Okay.
so on. So there's not much difference. So when I say Eastern Wartime, I'm basically saying what we now know as Eastern Standard Time.
I got you. I got it.
Yes, sir.
The boots on the ground or the people on the ground reporting this, but were they part of the invasion or was the news coming back?
Well,
I'm not sure how all that
part of the
worked out.
reason the invasion narrative was so anodyne, meaning it was so bloodless, if you will, was because the major effort that the newsmakers wanted to provide the major effort had been to get the story off the beaches. So they put war correspondents on the beaches. the thing is, despite all the resources they put into it, the 600 plus member battalion that they created to support the war correspondents, nothing worked. I think maybe off one of the British beaches, a carrier pigeon was sent off by either, it could have been an American unit or someone else, I don't know, maybe British, but the pigeon was the only one that made it to England with any news, and by then it was well outdated. So, for all intents and purposes, the attempt to get the bloody type of story off the beaches and into the, eyes of the American public completely fell flat and failed. That's why we get kind of what I say, an anodyne, kind of a sanitized view of what D-Day was like. And it was the biggest event that we held as a, as a moral imperative, fought by the best soldiers who were led by the best leaders. And that was essentially the same theme that we've carried all the way through.
You gotta admire the work that the correspondents were able to put together that night. I mean,
Well, they eventually did get stories off the beaches, it just wasn't on D-Day.
Yeah.
So and by the time the sun rose on the 7th of June, 1944, it was already in the Battle of Normandy. D-Day was a one-day event. So they were past that. The war was now moving out farther into Normandy. So what happened on D-Day, I mean, yes, there will be more stories to come and more filling out of the details later, but it stopped becoming the focus of the moment.
I mean, this had been such a secret, and then all of a sudden,
Well, it was the worst kept secret in history, that's for sure, because everybody knows it was coming. It was just the timing, the date, and the time it would start. And there was obviously weather issues that Eisenhower had to consider, things like that. But everybody knew it was coming, and they only knew it was going to come in sometime in May, June, July, because weather. And they needed paratroopers, so they needed good flying weather. They needed the bombers. They needed good flying weather for that.
Was any of the amateur radio involved in that time?
Not to my knowledge, sir, but it's there's nothing I uncovered in the evidence that I found that showed that there was any involvement in the passing of information from folks like that,
Okay.
amateur radio folks. Yes, ma'am.
How about Walter Winchell? How did he get his information?
Walter, where did he get his information?
Yes.
I don't know.
You know who
I'm
I'm
sure.
talking about?
Oh, I do know. I know exactly who you're talking about. Most people got their information at that time from the wire services. And those wire services had people on the ground all over the world and in the theaters of operation and so on. They relied heavily on the reports they got from those folks. And then they pushed those to their editors in the States. And so the Associated Press, United Press, and that's kind of why it was easier to come up with a common narrative, because a lot of them were using the very same news sources, but some of them were doing it in some unique ways.
I can remember the adults gathering around that big radio and listening to Walter Winchell every afternoon.
Well, I'm sure he got most of his information from those same wire service sources.
I was thinking he landed. He landed on the beach.
I don't know.
Walter Winchell, I don't think so. He wasn't one of the correspondents whose names I uncovered.
Oh, I thought he was
Got like Don Whitehead and people like that. Wes Gallagher, things of that nature. People like that. But Walter Winchell, not to my knowledge, he could have flown with some aircraft, but I was actually looking specifically, I had focused specifically on the war correspondents who were landing on the beach. Somewhat those who had accompanied air crews on the bombing runs, but mostly for what was happening on the ground or in the water. Yes, sir.
Hey, Stephen, the first of your four themes, the singular importance of this specific invasion through its scope, scale, and stated goals, and ultimately ending the War of Europe. Is it fair to say that was one of the themes that developed because it's an accurate description?
Yes. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, and it's really not a surprising theme. I mean, because like I said, there was, when Eisenhower was put in charge of the invasion planning in January, the whole world knew at that time that an invasion was gonna happen led by this person at a particular point in time down the future, and it was gonna be the biggest event. They had started pushing that particular theme early on in January, and it just, the press really made it gel when they did their own concurrent preparations, to make certain that they had the right people in place at the right time with the right equipment to be able to transmit the news and everything. Some of that worked, some of it didn't. And as a result, what got distilled into the narrative that we know now to be the D-Day narrative, that's what emerged.
I agree. Is it fair to say, and you kind of said this, least well kept secret of the war? In fact, isn't it in a lot of ways the most anticipated event of the war, even a couple of years
I would agree.
before?
So, won't get any argument from me on that. Yeah.
And as I tell students a lot, the Germans knew it was coming. They didn't know where, they didn't know when, but they knew it was going to happen.
They thought the bad weather bought them some time.
Exactly.
Right.
So when Rommel decided to go visit his wife on her birthday, which happened to be 6 June,
Right.
he was not at the right place at the right time because he didn't think we would attack during the short weather window that we got.
And we also had a question from online viewer. Life magazine's Bob Kappa Omaha Beach photos.
Right.
Ruined in the London processing lab. Is that truth, legend,
True.
or a little bit of both?
Bob Kappa, he was an independent. I can't remember his affiliation at the time. It was with a magazine. Life magazine.
Life,
I think it was
Life,
that particular. You're right. You just said it. It is true. What happened to his particular numerous shots ended up getting damaged in the lab because when he actually managed to get them back to England, only 11 out of the several hundred photos he had taken survived because a very nervous technician put them in the wrong emulsifier at the wrong time, or had it overheated or something. I don't quite know the technical details of it, but only 11 survived, and they give this they were otherwise clear photos according to Kappa when he took them, but they give this kind of spooky, surreal edge to them because of it's kind of almost mystical. You see these guys landing on the beach, this kind of blanched out background and everything. They seem more like an impressionistic sense of what happened on Omaha Beach, and added, I think, to the collective mystery that we've associated with Omaha Beach. Yeah, I'm not sure he was employed too long afterwards. But you got to understand too. He realized he was dealing with so far the only photographs of the invasion up to that point, and there was a lot of pressure on him. I'm sure he had a lot of people looking over his shoulder, making certain that he got it right. They still, but yes, it wasn't until the 19 June Life magazine edition that the actual full 11 photos that survived from Kappa were published, and that's the first time the American public actually saw what Omaha Beach looked like during the invasion. Anything else?
Any other questions? Well, we appreciate you joining us, and a quick reminder, we do have copies of the book that Stephen will be happy to sign afterwards. If you're watching online, email the gift shop, and we'll be happy to provide some books that way as well. But we want to thank you for this very interesting talk, and I think we will never exhaust the discussion of what happened on D-Day and the way it was covered. But I think you'll agree with me that what the war correspondents did, how they reported it, what people knew at home, and what they found out later on, is just a fascinating topic to explore. And we are still learning things here at the National D-Day Memorial. Yeah, absolutely. So I want to thank you for joining us, and again, those of you here in the Quonset hut. Let's stick around and talk to Steve afterwards. So thank you very much.
Thank you, folks.